Welcome to the Maverick Paradox Podcast, where we explore what it is to be a maverick and discover effective modes of leadership. I am Judith Germain, and my mission is to propel the maverick mindset into a world where character and integrity will ultimately have a higher premium than personality and bureaucracy. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you would like to continue with me, then please subscribe to my podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or one of the other popular podcast platforms. And today our guest is Bjorn Guldager. Hi, Bjorn.
Hi, Judith. Thanks for the wonderful pronunciation of my Danish name.
I know, I've been practicing. Tell me about you.
Yeah, thanks. As the name implied, I'm not a native from an English-speaking country. I am Danish, but I've lived in India, England, and the US, so I do have some familiarity with different ways of speaking your language. And I probably stumble upon something that is neither nor, the way I speak. So excuse me in advance, if I don't speak the language in exactly the way that you as a listener do. There's a daytime job which has led me to meeting up with you and many other people over the years, which is in the consulting world, where I have my own company. But I do my bits for various companies, getting their projects and organizations and people from A to B, through a method which I could expand on, but I will briefly explain it as a capture, inspire, and move. And that leads me often to a consulting work of anywhere from 2-3 months up to 6-9 months with a company on a project, and sometimes with a succession of projects for different companies. And apart from that, father of 3, husband of 1 at a time, and enjoy playing music and many other things. I think in today's conversation we'll focus on the professional parts, but it may be relevant to bring in some aspects from the passion part or the personal parts, in which case we can do that.
I thought today we will, you're one of my favourite socialised mavericks, and I thought it'd be interesting to talk a little bit about what does mavericks mean to you, and also kind of how mavericks think. I'm very interested in how mavericks think. So what I've noticed with mavericks is that all mavericks, I think, even the extreme ones, are very good strategic thinkers. Is that something that you would agree with?
Well, I think that mavericks to some extent is a way of living out some things, and you can do that on any level. So, some even mavericks may be very good on the strategic level, some may be more on the operational level, and some may be more on the tactical level. But part of being a maverick is about influencing others. Then, of course, in order to influence, you need to have an idea of where you want to take them. And that requires some alignment with the strategy. So from that point of view, yes. But I wouldn't make the equation that because you're a maverick, then you're also a brilliant strategist. It would probably lead to a lot of hybrids and nemesis if you were to think like that.
I think a lot of mavericks are good strategists, but the strategic thinking is slightly different. It's more about thinking about the whole thing, the whole of the time. So mavericks are very good at seeing how things affect other things. So see the connections between things, and they will consider those connections before they start the planning stage.
Yes.
I recently did a training course for strategic thinking, and I was thinking about emergent thinking. And for me, emergent thinking is all about looking at the problem and looking at the thing in its whole. So the example that I've seen before is that quite often we do a lot of deductive reasoning, and we look at the world as if it was a clock. So we pull the clock apart and we look at the cogs and we put them together and we say, okay, this is how a clock works. But you can't do that with, say, a cloud, because with the cloud, you can't pull a bit of fluffy bit off and go, okay, I understand the cloud. You've got to look at the whole thing. And it made me think about individuals and how we go around in the world today. And I'm sort of realising that, especially if you're a business owner, you really are an emergent organism. And success comes from seeing how everything fits together rather than trying to put ourselves into little pots. Does that make sense?
Well, it does. And let me just make a linkage to some work that I do, and which would be similar to probably a lot of you who will eventually listen to this. My daytime job is a consultant where I'm hired in freelance to work with companies to help them change something. And I have a method for that, which we may revert to. But here, the big picture of this is that in order to be able to go and get the team together, inspire them to do some work and eventually get there, we really need to have a good understanding of what that is, define success. And at that point in time, we can't say, well, let's look at these 4 business requirements that you may have, which would be taking it apart and catalyzing it into 4 requirements. You may then eventually achieve a result that fulfills those or most of those. But if you really want to have success, you need to achieve not just results, but an effect within an organization. And that can only be done when you look at it a little bit, I could call it inductively, or you can say emergently. From the beginning, you have to have the end in mind, not just in terms of results, but also in terms of the effect that you want to have the organization keep on doing later on. It could be called an organizational blueprint. What does it have to be capable of? But whatever you call it, that is what we have to think about, not just what to achieve as a go live, but what to achieve with the organization as a stay alive, to introduce some of my favorite terms there. Did that make sense, Judith?
Yeah, it does. And I love the staying alive, because most people forget that part.
There's a huge gap between going live, which is where the project organization ends or thinks that it ends its deliveries, and then the stay alive, where the organization has not just received it, but they've also accepted it. They are motivated to living in the new environment or situation, and they're also suitably trained to actually carry out whatever the work or the new setup may be. And that gap, often referred to also within change management theory, is really, really accountable for a lot of failures or lack of successes, or celebrating too small successes within projects.
That's interesting. So how do you think your Maverick perspective on things makes a difference within the roles that you do?
Yeah, from reading your good material and talking with you over the years, I learned that you distinguish a lot between, manipulating your way to results and work in general and influencing your way. And so both of these could be described as Maverick ways. But I would say that the one that I really have to use in my work is the influencing way. So the socialized Maverick style is very natural, and in fact essential often to achieve results. Another way of defining this is that normally when I'm hired as an external to join a company, I don't have any stick. I can't fire people. Often they have been assigned to the project before I even joined. So my direct say there to hire and fire is often limited. So no stick and only half a carrot, because I can't offer them job incentive or, I can't promote them afterwards, So I really have to maximize people management skills, stakeholder interest managing skills, and influencing skills. And that links very well with the Maverick way, I would say.
Oh yeah, I think that is interesting. It suddenly made me think about my own sort of corporate career progression, and I think I had to develop influencing skills quite early as well, because I was always the youngest person with quite a lot of seniority and also female. So in the same way, I couldn't rely on years of experience, and I couldn't rely on age or anything like that, and quite often having to make decisions in areas that you hadn't spent years learning. So you had to find a different way. And manipulation only works, it does work, and it does work really well, but it only works for a short period of time, because eventually people will revolt.
Yes. Well, but here's another linkage then between, being a Maverick and not just being a consultant or a project manager, but being a leader in general, because one of the ways to define a leader is that it's one that people want to follow. And another one is, of course, it's one who brings out value in others. So my role, your role, and probably the role of many who will listen to this is not one who can just either tell people what to do or, have all those manipulation tools at their disposal. So, we will not focus on being the best. We'll have to focus on making others the best that they can be and work well together. And that requires influencing. And to me, that is really a true, one of many, of course, but a true leadership quality to be able to do that.
Yeah, I agree. I know that you've talked a lot in the past about the hero's journey. Is there a Maverick perspective to that?
Yes. I mean, any story about a hero, of course, has a start and a task and some struggles on the way, and hopefully a happy ending. Not all hero stories have, but most of them have. And of course, when we approach this professionally, we will always strive for the happy ending. Although we may also in projects sometimes realize that it cannot be obtained, and then there's a different Maverick journey for that as well. But let's just stick with the journey for a little bit. If I may put my personal spin on it, a brief way to describe my method on this is to captivate, inspire, and move. And how that links to the hero journey? Well, first you need to find out what journey the organization is on. And now we get into the strategy part as well, finding out where they are, finding out where they want to be, and then planning the journey from there. Those are three strategic themes that you must always touch on in the early stages of a project, or whenever you're dealing with a business development or company development in general. So now we have some premises for that journey. We have an outline of the journey. And anybody who's ever tried to move things from A to B will know that even though you plan a straight line between them, it will never happen, because either B moves or there will be obstacles on the way. So you have to look for moving goalposts, and you have to look for all these obstacles, which is similar to what the hero's journey will always be. There will be a dragon, somebody who does injustice or sets up a trap or something, whatever it may be. And in order to deal with that, you need to both have inspired people so that they keep focus on and are fired up on what is the goal that we're still trying to achieve, or what is the revised goal that we will try to achieve. So that is the inspire part. And then the move part is all the things that you need to then do to keep moving somewhere. Sometimes you have to make a decision to either go right or left. And typically the worst decision is to not make one, because then you really come to a standstill. So, you need to do things to make sure that there is some progress. You have some measurements, yardsticks, if you will, of where you are going. While you went left, then maybe the next turn needs to be a right turn in order to keep the general direction. All these things. So I've summed it up in a CIM acronym, captivate, inspire, and move. Of course, that doesn't explain how you arrive at the destination, but it does explain a lot of the method that you will use on your journey towards there.
Yeah, I like that. It's quite a good process to consider, and I guess it's quite unique too, because it's what you do. So my process would be different to your process. Okay. So mine is kind of, I tend to rediscover what it is they want to do and how they want to rediscover it, and then renew it, and then make sure it's realised. And for me, it's a concurrent process. So it's something that happens on a continuous circle as opposed to something that happens sequentially. And I think we all have our own processes of doing things, but we can't always articulate them.
Very true. And if I may put in a comment here on, as a project manager, you have to very much deal with the now, because there's so many situations that happen in the present time. At the same time, you have to learn from the past, and you also have to plan for the future. So I can't give you the exact percentages, but I would say if I were to give a go at it, you'd probably need to have 10%, focus on the past. So, if the budget was fulfilled and if you had your learnings and all that. And initially you need to be a lot in the future, but as an overall project, maybe you need to be 20% future oriented, but you need to be 70% in the now. And that's where you can plan your sequence, but you can't always live it, because the universe may have other sequential plans for you. And then you need to deal with them in the order that the universe serves them to you, not just the order that you have planned it. It's called rolling with the punches. But that's also where, even the best plan will fall to pieces if it's not robust and flexible when it meets reality. That's what often happens with huge methods. And excuse me for saying this, but by big companies, they will have a very elaborate operation manual. But if the reality is different, then they may try to fit the reality into the manual. And as a Maverick, you really have to try to find out how to make it work in reality. In other words, you can't just do the operation and the patient dies. You have to keep your finger on the pulse and ensure survival. Hence my earlier remark on staying alive.
Yes, and that's true. It makes a lot of sense, because I've seen loads of organisations become so rigid because they start arguing it's not in the strategy plan. And it's like, yes, but you know that your competitor was going to do this, or you were going to lose half your staff. You've got to change. So that makes perfect sense. You've lived in lots of different countries and you speak lots of languages. Do you see leadership different in the different cultures, or is leadership essentially the same?
I think there are two aspects to that. There are certain elements that, you would always really require in a leader, or want to see displayed in a leader. That could be integrity, trustworthiness, clarity of vision, enabling the organization to execute on it, etc. So these are pretty universal. But I've lived in many good countries, including yours. And so the Scandinavian typical leadership style is different from the, say, English and the countries that, have been heavily influenced by the British standard.
What do you see the main differences?
Yeah, I'll give a small example based on me having lived for a couple of years in India and seen how an Indian management style would work and how a Scandinavian management style would work. So in our countries, we are typically very trust-based and goal-focused, which means that the typical leader will say, here's the goal. Now I trust you to work your own way over there and let me know if you have any problems on the way. And the leader will rarely, look the employee over the shoulder. And in fact, the employee may feel his privacy invaded or her privacy invaded if the leader sort of steps up and say, did you do this thing you promised? How's it going? What's your completion percentage? Things like that. They are not typical parts of the Scandinavian style. They are more prevalent in British or even American leadership style, and they are extremely visible and prevalent in the Indian leadership style. In fact, employees expect to be monitored and seen, because if he doesn't see me, he will not know all the good job I'm doing, So a typical bad path for a project is to start off saying, here's the goal, you work your own way. Then for a while, you may come and say, how's it going? And the employee will say, oh, everything is all right, no problem. And they will shake their head and you will think that it's okay until the point comes where you are evidently very late because, you didn't issue clear, assertive instructions and you didn't follow up on them the way that you would actually be expected to do in that culture. And then we have a crisis situation. And then a Scandinavian manager may then revert to a very aggressive and extremely micromanaging style, which is also not suitable. So it's like, either we will be way too little involved or we'll be way too much involved, maybe even to the extent that we go, well, if I have to show you, I will do it myself. And then you don't delegate any longer. So those are some traps when different cultures collide, which they often do in global or multinational projects. So, and I guess if I could just sum that up a little bit, you have to know when to apply a more trust-based style and when to apply very controlling style, and then what you could call an assertive style in the middle. And basically a lot of this is simply situational leadership, but that does apply to Maverick as well. And you really have to be very careful and observant to it when you're working across cultures.
Yes, I think that's interesting. You described their very good situational leadership style, and I like that as a technique of working. And I think that's probably how it's different to Maverick leadership, because Maverick leadership I describe as it's not a technique, it's a way of life. It's the way that you are. And you use various different techniques to achieve what you need to achieve. But Maverick leadership is a way of being. And then there are strategies and there's a methodology, but you use it all the time. So whether you're at home or whether you're at work, it's the same things that you're doing. And so in some respects, I think it's more long lasting.
But that's also a good way to define a Maverick as a person. But if you use your definition that you just gave on Mavericks and match that with, say, a typical definition of company culture is the way that we do things around here, then you also arrive at a point where you may reach the limits of where Maverick leadership can be applied. And that is good for a Maverick to be aware of. When can he or she actually not utilize their influencing skills? And, should you then do something about that? Should you bring it to the steering group or the project board or management? Or should you bow out with grace and say, sorry, I'm not the right person for this? Because sometimes you won't be. And I think a good Maverick should also be true to both themselves so that they do things in a consistent way, but also be able to see when that style of being simply may not be usable for a company. And again, without resorting to cliches, oftentimes it will be hard for Maverick to work in certain public companies because they have a way of operating that they would benefit immensely from being led by a Maverick, but they won't be in many cases. So we have to recognize
that's a really good point, because Mavericks aren't very good in steady state organizations. If you really want the Maverick to work, it needs to be a challenging situation where it needs a lot of fixing or a lot of change. But if it's just hierarchical bureaucracy that nothing changes, then the Maverick's more likely to cause more harm than good.
They could. If I can bring in a picture from my earlier transport and shipping days, I was with Maersk for many years, is that a Maverick, may be very good when you plan the course and initially set out on the course. And also if you come to certain obstacles on the way. But once it's really plain sailing, the course is clear, the weather is clear, the destination is clear. Of course, you also want to see things through, but actually at that point of time, it will often be a different personality that can come in and simply provide their value to that. And you can go and probably provide more value somewhere else. So, do you stay with the project I would typically do if I'm required to do it, but there will also be instances where that may actually be better undertaken by a different personality. And that's fine. That's what they need, and then that's what we will do.
Brilliant. I think that's a great place to stop. So thanks a lot for that, Bjorn. Would you come back again?
I'll be happy to do another one. Let's do that, Judith. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you once again for tuning into the Maverick Paradox Podcast. I hope you have enjoyed listening to my conversation with Bjorn as much as I have enjoyed having it. If you would like to learn more about Mavericks and leadership, then please subscribe to my podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or one of the other popular podcast platforms. Alternatively, apply to join the Maverick Paradox exclusive Facebook group. My website is maverickparadox.com. Find out how willful independence can ultimately change all our futures. Thanks again, and see you soon.